Good day. Is inspiration a bad thing? Is it bad for a game to take inspiration from another? Now, when a game does this, it is called a ripoff, or they're just copying. But really, if a game gives you more of what you already liked, is that bad? Well, ladies and gentlemen, we're taking a look at Enemy Front, a game that takes inspiration from many classic FPS games, most notably Far Cry. So with that, let's take a look at the unsung game that is Enemy Front. Enemy Front began life way back in 2011 and was originally set to be released in 2012. But it was delayed all the way until 2014, and during its rather long development cycle, several features were actually cut from the game, most notably the ability to customize the health system for the game. Essentially, one would have had the choice between regenerative health, boo, and health packs, yay! I have a feeling that if they had just scrapped the multiplayer, they might have had both the time and money to implement such an important feature. But more on multiplayer later. Enemy Front is sort of a modern-day first-person shooter. It has all the trappings of a modern-day first-person shooter, regenerative health, the two-weapon rule, but thankfully the two-weapon rule is somewhat mitigated. Essentially, you can carry a third weapon, but it has to be a pistol, and I'm not really sure why more games don't do this. But really, outside of the health and weapon systems, this game starts to pull away from the horrid COD monster. Instead of being devoured by the COD monster, Enemy Front has merely had its legs bitten off by it. As this game is actually more like Far Cry. It has open levels for you to explore and alternate paths for you to take, and you can choose to go the sneaky route or you can go all guns blazing. Sadly, like in Far Cry 1, the stealth is rather, shall we say, broken, as all the Germans have X-ray vision and can spot you from 400 miles away behind a wall. And apparently they're all telepathic, because when one Soldaten spots you, they all very well spot you at the same time and start filling your general environs with great amounts of lead. Sometimes. This game's one major flaw is inconsistency. No more is this shown with the AI. Sometimes they spot you in an instant, and other times they walk right up to you and still don't see you. The stealth system, while broken, can sometimes work, and I have successfully pulled off a stealthy maneuver around a large group of enemies. One funny thing about the stealth is the fact that apparently gunshots in this world don't carry all that far, as you can shoot a German soldier, and so long as there are no immediate witnesses, you don't set off an alarm, or have troops 50 yards away go into an alarm state, meaning they must all be bloody well deaf. Which admittedly might not be that far-fetched, as it's not like you get earplugs in the middle of a war. While you have regenerative health, sometimes you don't have much of it. There have been instances where I was able to tank multiple shots from a Mauser 98 Kurtz, but then later die from just a couple hits from an MP38. So sometimes it's a good idea to just run and gun, and sometimes it's not. It just depends on the situation. You can also do silent takedowns as well, and these work well enough until some eagle-eyed sucker spots you from 400 miles out from inside a wall. The game also, like so many classic shooters, has an objective system. And unlike COD, this objective system is a bit more than just walk to the exit. In Enemy Front, you have many of the classic objectives that have long since been forgotten by many of the various COD clones. You actually have to find explosives yourself and use them yourself. You actually have to find sniper rifles yourself and find targets yourself. I know this might seem strange, but you actually have to play Enemy Front instead of simply pressing F to win the game. What's even better is the fact that Enemy Front has secondary objectives. Remember those? And you can actually fail these objectives as well. Whatever next? And sometimes, if you succeed at one of those secondary objectives, you get access to more powerful weapons. That sadly make no sense. Like here, you help out this French partisan and he leads you to an MP44. Now keep in mind, this level takes place in 1940, just after the fall of France. Now, if you know nothing of guns, you won't quite get just how funny it is to find this rifle here. Not only did the STG-44 not exist in 1940, the year of the STG-44's existence is in the name, hence the 44. But you know what? Like in real life, this is the best weapon in the game, as it holds 30 rounds of 7.92 Kurtz, thus giving it better range and stopping power than the MP40, and is more rapidly fired than the K98K. So while it's not historically accurate, it's damn fun to use. Really, the game's historical accuracy is kind of all over the place. Now, in most World War II games, you only face tiger tanks or potentially panthers, but mostly it's going to be tigers. In this game, in the 1940 level, you face the historically accurate Panzer III. However, you take it out with the historically inaccurate Panzerfaust, which of course did not exist yet. And it's even worse because the game calls it a bazooka, which was an American innovation that also didn't exist yet. But rivet counting aside, the weapons in the game are decent enough all around, and there are some that have not really been seen in other World War II first-person shooters. Graphically, the game looks damn good for 2011, but by 2014, these graphics were a bit on the aged side, and the textures are a bit low-res and muddy. The weapon graphics are not that amazing either, and the enemies, while decently detailed, still look kind of like crap. And the cutscenes, well, the less said about those, the better. Still though, the graphics are not all that bad, and there are some areas that look okay, if not in graphical complexity, but design. The levels for the game are quite well realized, and the game is fun to fight through, and there are several levels that take place in castles. And as we all know, castle levels make World War II games all the more awesome. Hell, in real life there was actually an epic battle at a castle no less, where German troops and American troops joined together to protect the French Prime Minister, who had been held captive, along with a few other high-level captives as well, from being killed by a bunch of fanatical SS troopers. Look it up! Sound design for the game is also a bit spotty. Some of the weapons actually sound really good, most notably the MG38 and the MG42. Usually machine guns in game lack the throaty roar that they have in real life and actually sound kinda weak most of the time. Here, however, the MGs all sound bad-ass. Other than this though, the game suffers from really bad sound mixing with inconsistent volume. Essentially, when you get hit, the pain sounds sound all bloody wrong, and they actually sound like they're coming from someone else. Music for the game is pretty good, but it suffers from a lack of variety. Voice acting is surprisingly decent, and on average, the various actors turn in, at the very least, acceptable performances. The PC port for Enemy Front is merely okay. It's not absolutely horrible like, say, Resident Evil 4's initial PC port, but there is nothing amazing about it either. Performance-wise, I usually stayed over 60 FPS, but there were some areas where the frame rate tanked for little reason that was readily apparent. Now, this game is being run on an RX 480 4GB model. That bloody frame rate should not even think about dipping down. The game, thankfully, can swap between either a controller or a keyboard and mouse. However, if you have a controller plugged in, the game only shows button prompts and not the keyboard controls, which is rather annoying, especially if you're playing the game and want to know how to do a bloody stealth kill and the game is just telling you to hit X. Still, this game handles controllers better than Skyrim did, as you don't have to disable the controller to use the bloody keyboard. Enemy Front also has a bit of DLC as well, the Saint Nazaire campaign, and it gives you more of what the base game gave you. This game does of course have multiplayer, and I have no idea why. In this day and age, tacked on multiplayer for a game with as many issues as this game is just sad. Sad because the developers could have simply cut it and focused on ironing out the various single-player issues and thus have had a superior product. Really, in this day and age, very few games need a multiplayer, as there are numerous superior free options on the market today. For the World War II shooter, there are two that come to mind: Wolfenstein: Enemy Territory, and the rather straightforwardly named World War II Online. Both games are free and far better than anything the developers could have tacked on to Enemy Front. Ultimately, tacked-on multiplayer modes just wither and die and likely will never get popular to begin with, and only waste resources better spent on single-player. So now, let's take a look at the game's fairly decent story. The story for Enemy Front foregoes the typical modern warfare mindset of the silent protagonist, who is so filled with stoicism that Spock and the God Emperor of Mankind would tell him to cut it back a bit. Rather, the player character has a voice, and damn, we are definitely getting back to 2007 levels now. I have never understood why first-person shooters went back to the old silent protagonist concept. That kind of storytelling was old news even back in the 90s, when Dark Forces showed how much better an FPS could be with a voiced player character. The voice actor for the player character, Hawkins here, is decent enough, but he never really says anything that is profound and is rather generic in personality. The overall plot for Hawkins is something out of a classic men's adventure novel. Hawkins is a reporter and at first decides to fight in World War II to get the story of the century, but eventually comes to realize that there are more reasons to fight World War II than personal gain. And while he is a bit generic, the other characters he interacts with can and be pretty cool. Like this member of the Polish Home Guard who has this really awesome line.
As usual, we are fucked.
I gotta use that for reviewing bad games. While the main adventure for Hawkins is more pulpy than not, the game still reminds you that this is World War II, the single largest and most destructive conflict in history. And unlike with most World War II shooters, it shows you the real nature of war, with soldiers shooting down civilians with impunity. Now you might think that this game just shows all Germans as Nazis, cold, heartless killing machines. But actually, this game goes a long way towards humanizing the enemy. One must remember that in real life, there is no faction that thinks of themselves as evil. Every faction believes themselves to be right, even when they are at their most hypocritical. The Germans were no different from any other faction when rationalizing their actions during the war, nor were they any less human for it. The German soldiers were still men, and not all of them were members of the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Many of them were conscripts that didn't really want to be there, but they had no choice in the matter. Remember, there was no such thing as being a conscientious objector in the German army. And that is another thing one must keep in mind. You are not always fighting Nazis in this game. Rather, you are fighting German soldiers. There is a difference between the two, and the game actually shows you this in different intervals. And really, the game does a great job of humanizing these soldiers. They question what they're doing, and in many instances, they actually show their human side. And you can even listen in on German conversations, and what they talk about is what soldiers generally talk about, not being evil and how much they enjoy killing, but about their home and family and things of that nature. Hell, there's even a scene where a German soldier is running late, and he acts in a very human manner. In World War II, the enemy was still human. They were still men. But in war, there is little choice in the matter of life and death. Either you fight or you die, and the same is true for the other side. So yes, the enemy is humanized because they are human, but you, the player, must fight because if you do not, you will die. Simple as that. And that's really the basic aspect of war. Sure, wars can start due to ideology, but for the fighting man, survival is the only ideology. But one must also keep in mind that this is a video game, and one can still have fun because none of this is actually real. But you need to keep in mind what this game represents did actually happen in many instances, well, sans the MP44 being around in 1940, and that these were still men. Calling all Germans evil is very disingenuous and is actually quite insulting. Well, that was really depressing. Well, boobies! Overall, the story does what it needs to do. It is fun where it should be, and serious where it needs to be. Ladies and gentlemen, back in the day, there used to be good games, bad games, and middle-of-the-road games. Before hype culture came to pervade every aspect of gaming, there could just be games that were, well, that was a pretty good game. That's it. That's all it needed to be. It was just a pretty good game. Not every game needed to be either the worst thing ever or greatest game of the year all years. Enemy Front is just a pretty good game. It's not the greatest game of the year all years, but then again, it doesn't need to be. It just needs to be a competent game, and that's exactly what it is. And I cannot recommend it enough. And I am GeneralLotz, wishing you good Enemy Front, and good World War II Online, or whatever makes you happy. If you enjoyed my review of Enemy Front, please consider subscribing, and if you can, please consider supporting me on Patreon so that I can continue bringing you these great video game reviews.